Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, chapters 21 to 24. On the surface of Magrathea, Arthur wandered about moodily. Ford had thoughtfully left him his copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to while away the time with. He pushed a few buttons at random. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a very unevenly edited book and contains many passages that simply seemed to accept it as like a good idea at the time. One of these, the one Arthur now came across, supposedly relates to the experiences of one Vit Vujicic, a quiet young student at the University of Maximegalon who pursued a brilliant academic career studying ancient philology, transformational ethics, and the wave harmonic theory of historical perception. And then, after a night of drinking pan-galactic gargle blasters with Zaphod Beeblebrox, became increasingly obsessed with the problem of what had happened to all the biros he'd bought over the past few years. There followed a long period of painstaking research, during which he visited all the major centres of biro loss throughout the galaxy and eventually came up with a quaint little theory which quite caught the public imagination at the time. Somewhere in the cosmos, he said, along with all the planets inhabited by humanoids, reptiloids, fishoids, walking treeoids, superintelligent shades of the colour blue, and there was also a planet entirely given over to biro life forms. And it was to this planet that unattended biros would make their way, slipping away quietly through wormholes in space to a world where they knew they could enjoy a uniquely biroid lifestyle, responding to highly biro-orientated stimuli and generally leading to the biro equivalent of the good life. And, as theories goes, this was all very fine and pleasant until Vit Vujicic suddenly claimed to have found this planet, and to have worked there for a while, driving a limousine for a family of cheap green retractables, whereupon he was taken away, locked up, wrote a book, and was finally sent into tax exile, which is the usual fate reserved for those who are determined to make a fool of themselves in public. When one day an expedition was sent to the spatial coordinates that Vujicic had claimed for this planet, they discovered only a small asteroid inhabited by a solitary old man who claimed repeatedly that nothing was true, though he was later discovered to be lying. There did, however, remain the question of both the mysterious 60,000 Altarian dollars paid yearly into a Bratisvogan bank account, and of course Zaphod Beeblebrox's highly profitable second-hand biro business. Arthur read this and put the book down. The robot still sat there, completely inert. Arthur got up and walked to the top of the crater. He walked around the crater. He watched two suns set magnificently over Magrathea. He went back down the crater. He woke the robot up, because even a manically depressed robot is better than talking to no one. Night's falling. Look, robot, the stars are coming out. From the heart of a dark nebula, it is possible to see the very few stars, and only very faintly, but they were there to be seen. The robot obediently looked at them and then looked back. I know. Wretched, isn't it? Oh, but that sunset. I've never seen anything like it in my wildest dreams. The two suns. It was like mountains of fire boiling into space. I've seen it. It's rubbish. We only ever had the one sun at home, persevered Arthur. I came from a planet called Earth, you know. I know. You keep going on about it. It sounds awful. Ah, no, it was a beautiful place. Did it have oceans? Oh, yes, great wide rolling blue oceans. I can't bear oceans. Tell me, do you get on well with other robots? Hate them. Hey, where are you going? Arthur couldn't bear any more. He had got up again. I think I'll just take another walk. I don't blame you, said Marvin, and counted 597,000 million sheep before falling asleep again a second later. Arthur slapped his arms about himself to try and get his circulation a little bit more enthusiastic about its job. He trudged back up the wall of the crater. Because the atmosphere was so thin, and because there was no moon, nightfall was very rapid, and it was by now very dark. Because of this, Arthur practically walked into the old man before he'd noticed him. Chapter 22. He was standing with his back to Arthur, watching the very last glimmers of light sink into the blackness behind the horizon. He was tallish, elderly, and dressed in a single long grey robe. When he turned, his face was thin and distinguished, careworn but not unkind, the sort of face you would happily bank with. But he didn't turn yet, not even to react to Arthur's yelp of surprise. Eventually the last rays of sun had vanished completely, and he turned. His face was still illuminated from somewhere, and when Arthur looked for the source of the light, he saw that a few yards away stood a small craft of some kind. A small hovercraft, Arthur guessed. It shed a dim pool of light around it. The man looked at Arthur. Sadly, it seemed. You choose a cold night to visit our dead planet, he said. Who are you? Stammered Arthur. The man looked away. Again a look of sadness seemed to cross his face. My name is not important, he said. He seemed to have something on his mind. Conversation was clearly something he felt he didn't have to rush at. Arthur felt awkward. You startled me, he said kind of lamely. The man looked round to him again and slightly raised his eyebrows. I said you startled me. Don't be alarmed. I will not hurt you. Arthur frowned at him. But you shot at us. There were missiles. The man gazed into the pit of the crater. The slight glow from Marvin's eyes cast a very faint red shadows on the huge carcass of the whale. The man chuckled slightly. An automatic system. Ancient computers ranged in the bowels of the planet tick away the dark millennia, and the ages hang heavy on their dusty databanks. I think they take the occasional pot shot to relieve the monotony. He looked gravely at Arthur and said, I'm a great fan of science, you know. Oh, really? Said Arthur, who was beginning to find the man's curious, kindly manner disconcerting. Oh, yes, said the old man, and simply stopped talking again. Ah, said Arthur. He had an odd feeling of being like a man in the act of adultery, who is surprised when the woman's husband wanders into the room, changes his trousers, passes a few idle remarks about the weather, and leaves again. You seem ill at ease, said the old man with polite concern. No. Well, actually, yes. Actually, you see, we really weren't expecting to find anybody about. In fact, I sort of gathered that you were all dead or something. Dead? Oh, good gracious me, no. We have but slept. Slept? Yes, through the economic recession, you see. said the old man, apparently unconcerned about whether Arthur understood a word he was talking about or not. Arthur had to prompt him again. Economic recession? Oh, well, you see, 5 million years ago, the galactic economy collapsed, and seeing that custom-built planets are something of a luxury commodity, you see. He paused and looked at Arthur. You know we built planets, do you? He asked. Well, yes, I sort of gathered. Fascinating trade, said the old man, and a wistful look came into his eyes. Doing the coastlines was my favourite. Used to have endless fun doing the little bits and fjords. So anyway, he tried to find his thread again. The recession came and we decided it would save a lot of bother if we just slept through it. So we programmed the computers to revive us when it was all over. The man stifled a slight yawn and continued. The computers are index linked to the galactic stock market prices, you see, and we were all to be revived when everybody else had rebuilt the economy enough to afford our rather expensive services. Arthur, a regular Guardian reader, was deeply shocked at this. Well, that's a pretty unpleasant way to behave, isn't it? Is it? Asked the old man mildly. I'm sorry, I'm a bit out of touch. He pointed down to the crater. Is that robot yours? No, came a thin metallic voice from up the crater. I'm mine. Well, if you call it a robot, muttered Arthur, it's more like an electronic silking machine. Bring it, said the old man. Arthur was quite surprised to hear a note of decision suddenly present in the old man's voice. He called to Marvin, who crawled up the slope, making a big show of being lame, which he wasn't. On second thoughts, said the old man, leave it here. You must come with me. Great things are afoot. He turned towards his craft, which, though no apparent signal had been given, now drifted quietly towards them through the dark. Arthur looked down at Marvin, who now made an equally big show of turning around laboriously and trudging off down into the crater again, muttering sour nothings to himself. Come on, or you will be late. Late? For what? What is your name, human? It's Dent, Arthur Dent. Late, as in the late Dent Arthur Dent, said the old man. That's a sort of threat, you see. Another wistful look came into his tired old eyes. I've never been very good at them myself, but I am told they can be very effective. Arthur blinked at him. What an extraordinary person, he muttered to himself. I beg your pardon, said the old man. Oh, nothing. I'm sorry, said Arthur in embarrassment. All right, where do we go? Into my air car, said the old man, motioning Arthur to get into the craft, which had settled silently next to them. We are going deep into the bowels of the planet, where even now our race has been revived from its 5 million-year slumber. Magrathea awakes. Arthur shivered involuntarily as he seated himself next to the old man. The strangeness of it, the silent bobbing movement of the craft as it soared into the night sky, quite unsettled him. He looked at the old man, his face illuminated by the dull glow of tiny lights on the instrument panel. Excuse me, he said to him. What is your name, by the way? My name, said the old man, and the same distant sadness came into his face. He paused. My name is Slarty Bartfast. Arthur practically choked. I beg your pardon, he spluttered. Slarty Bartfast, repeated the old man quietly. Slarty Bartfast? The old man looked at him gravely. I said it wasn't important. The air car sailed through the night. Chapter 23. It is an important and popular fact that things are not always what they seem. For instance, on the planet Earth, man had always assumed that he was more intelligent than dolphins because he had achieved so much. The wheel, New York, wars, and so on, whilst all the dolphins had ever done was muck about in the water having a good time. But conversely, the dolphins had always believed that they were far more intelligent than man for precisely the same reasons. Curiously enough, the dolphins had long known of the impending destruction of the planet Earth and had made many attempts to alert mankind to the danger. But most of their communications were misinterpreted as amusing attempts to punch footballs or whistle for titbits. So they eventually gave up and left Earth by their own means shortly before the Vogons arrived. The last ever dolphin message was misinterpreted as a surprisingly sophisticated attempt to do a double backward somersault through a hoop whilst whistling the Star-Spangled Banner. But in fact the message was this: "So long and thanks for all the fish." In fact, there was only one species on the planet more intelligent than dolphins, and they spent a lot of their time in behavioural research laboratories, running around inside wheels and conducting frighteningly elegant and subtle experiments on man. The fact that once again man completely misinterpreted this relationship was entirely according to the creature's plans. Chapter 24. Silently the air car coasted through the cold darkness, a single soft glow of light that was utterly alone in the deep Magrathian night. It sped swiftly. Arthur's companion seemed sunk in his own thoughts, and when Arthur tried on a couple of occasions to engage him in conversation again, he would simply reply by asking if he was comfortable enough, and then left it at that. Arthur tried to gauge the speed at which they were travelling, but the blackness outside was absolute and he was denied any reference points. The sense of motion was so soft and slight he could almost believe they were hardly moving at all. Then a tiny glow of light appeared in the far distance, and within seconds had grown so much in size that Arthur realised he was travelling towards them at a colossal speed, and he tried to make out what sort of craft it might be. He peered at it, but was unable to discern any clear shape, and suddenly gasped in alarm as the air car dipped sharply and headed downwards in what seemed certain to be a collision course. Their relative velocity seemed unbelievable, and Arthur had hardly time to draw a breath before it was all over. Next thing he was aware of was an insane silver blur that seemed to surround him. He twisted his head sharply round and saw a small black point dwindling rapidly in the distance behind him. It took him several seconds to realise what had happened. They had plunged into a tunnel in the ground. The colossal speed had been their own relative to the glow of the light, which was a stationary hole in the ground, the mouth of the tunnel. The insane blur of silver was the circular wall of tunnel down which they were shooting, apparently at several hundred miles an hour. He closed his eyes in terror. After a length of time he made no attempt to judge. He'd sensed a slight subsidence in their speed, and some while later he became aware they were gradually gliding to a gentle halt. He opened his eyes again. They were still in the silver tunnel, threading and weaving their way through what appeared to be a criss-cross warren of converging tunnels. When they finally stopped, it was in a small chamber of curved steel. Several tunnels also had their terminus here. And at the farthest end of the chamber Arthur could see a large circle of dim, irritating light. It was irritating because it played tricks with the eyes. It was impossible to focus on it properly or tell how near or far it was. Arthur guessed, quite wrongly, it might be ultraviolet. Slarty Bartfast turned and regarded Arthur with his solemn old eyes. Earthman, we are now deep in the heart of Magrathea. How did you know I was an Earthman? Demanded Arthur. These things will become clear to you, said the old man. At least, clearer than they are at the moment, he added with a slight doubt in his voice. He continued, I should warn you, though, that the chamber we are about to pass into does not literally exist within our planet. It's a little too large. We are about to pass through a gateway into a vast tract of hyperspace, and it may disturb you. Arthur made nervous noises. Slarty Bartfast touched a button and added, not entirely reassuringly, It scares the willies out of me. Hold tight! The car shot forward straight into the circle of light, and suddenly Arthur had a fairly clear idea of what infinity looked like. It wasn't infinity, in fact. Infinity itself looks flat and uninteresting. Looking up into the night sky is looking into infinity. Distance is incomprehensible and therefore meaningless. The chamber into which the air car emerged was anything but infinite. It was just very, very, very big. So big that it gave the impression of infinity far better than infinity itself. Arthur's senses bobbed and span as, travelling at the immense speed he knew the air car attained, they climbed slowly through the open air, leaving the gateway through which they had passed an invisible pinprick in the shimmering wall behind them. The wall. The wall defined the imagination, seduced it and defeated it. The wall was so paralyzingly vast and sheer that its top, bottom and sides passed away beyond the reach of sight. The mere shock of vertigo would kill a man. The wall appeared perfectly flat. It would take the finest laser measuring equipment to detect that as it climbed, apparently into infinity, as it dropped dizzily away, as it planed out to either side, it also curved. It met itself again, 13 light seconds away. In other words, the wall formed the inside of a hollow sphere. A sphere over 3 million miles across and flooded with unimaginable light. Welcome, said Slarty Bartfast, as a tiny speck that was the air car, travelling now 3 times the speed of sound, crept imperceptibly forward into the mind-boggling space. Welcome to our factory floor. Arthur stared about him in a kind of wonderful horror. Ranged away before them, at distance he could neither judge nor even guess at, were a series of curious suspensions. Delicate traceries of metal and light hung about in shadowy spherical shapes that hung in space. This is where we make most of our planets, you see. You mean? Arthur tried to form the words. You mean you're starting it all up again? Oh, no, good heavens, no, exclaimed the old man. No, the galaxy isn't nearly rich enough to support us yet. No, we've been awakened to perform just one extraordinary commission for very special clients from another dimension. It may interest you. There in the distance in front of us. Arthur followed the old man's finger till he was able to pick out the floating structure he was pointing out. It was indeed the only one of the many structures that betrayed any sign of activity about it, though this was a more subliminal impression than anything one could put one's finger on. At that moment, however, a flash of light arced through the structure and revealed in stark relief the patterns that were formed on the dark sphere within. Patterns that Arthur knew, rough blobby shapes that were familiar to him as the shapes of words, part of the furniture of his mind. For a few seconds he sat in stunned silence as the images rushed around his mind and tried to find somewhere to settle down and make sense. Part of his brain told him that he knew perfectly well what he was looking at and what these shapes represented, whilst another, quite sensible, refused to countenance the idea and abdicated responsibility for any further thinking in that direction. The flash came again, and this time there could be no doubt. "The Earth?" whispered Arthur. "Well, the Earth Mark II, in fact," said Slarty Bartfast cheerfully. We're making a copy from the original blueprints." There was a pause. "Are you trying to tell me," Arthur said slowly and with control, "that you originally made the Earth?" "Oh, yes. Did you ever go to a place, I think it was called Norway?" No, I didn't." "Pity. That was one of mine. I won an award, you know. Lovely crinkly edges. I was most upset to hear of its destruction." "You were upset?" "Yes. 5 minutes later on, it wouldn't have mattered so much. It was quite a shocking cock-up." "Huh?" "Well, the mice were furious." "The mice were furious?" Oh, yes. "Yes, well, I expect the dogs and the cats and the duck-billed platypuses. But they hadn't paid for it, you see, had they?" "Look, would it just save you a lot of time if I just gave up and went mad now?" For a while the air car flew on in awkward silence. Then the old man tried patiently to explain. "Earthman, the planet you lived on was commissioned, paid for and run by mice, and it was destroyed 5 minutes before the completion of the purpose for which it was built, and we've got to build another one." Only one word registered with Arthur. "Mice?" "Indeed, Earthman." "Look, sorry, are we talking about the same thing? Are we talking about little white furry things with the cheese fixation and women standing on tables screaming in early 60s sitcoms?" Slarty Bartfast coughed politely. "Earthman, it seems hard to follow your mode of speech. Remember, I've been asleep inside this planet of Magrathea for 5 million years, and I know little of these early 60s sitcoms of which you speak. These creatures you call mice, you see, are not quite as they appear. They are merely the protrusion into our dimension of vast, hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings. The whole business with the cheese and the squeaking is just a front, you see." The old man paused and, with a sympathetic frown, continued. "They've been experimenting on you, I'm afraid." Arthur thought about this for a second, and then his face cleared. No, I see the source of the misunderstanding now. No, look, you see, what happened was that we used to do experiments on them. They were often used in behavioral research, Pavlov, all that sort of stuff. So what happened was the mice would be set all sorts of tests, learning to ring bells, run round mazes and things, so that the whole nature of the learning process could be examined. And from our observations, their behaviour, we were able to learn all sorts of things about our own. Arthur's voice tailed off. Such subtlety. One has to admire it." "What?" said Arthur.
Well, how better to disguise their real natures, and how better to guide your thinking? Suddenly running down the maze the wrong way, eating the wrong bit of cheese, unexpectedly dropping dead of myxomatosis. It's finely calculated, and the cumulative effect can be enormous. He paused for effect. You see, Earthman, they really are particularly clever, hyper-intelligent pan-dimensional beings. Your planet and people have formed the matrix of an organic computer, running a 10 million year research program. Let me tell you the whole story. It'll take a little time. Time, said Arthur weakly, is not currently one of my problems.